Yeah, I think that's pretty well it. Mike, that's probably a good distance for you for the mic.
Okay.
You're a big, loud guy. I'm sure he'll pick you up here. I think you'll be just fine.
Not the first time that's been pointed out. So, all right. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's do it.
Okay.
Naturally, I like to start things at the beginning. So why don't you tell me where you were born and what life was like for you growing up?
Sure. I was born in technically Squeezing Township, which is Georgetown Hospital, but we lived in Caledon. Grew up primarily in sort of a rural farming community. There was 3 neighbors on the road at the time. Spent my first 12 years there, and then moved to Georgetown. I've been primarily in Georgetown ever since. The early years were rough. If I'm saying true things, my parents were not able to provide a stable home, so sort of born into a bit of chaos. And that looked like a number of things. That looked like some neglect. That looked like some emotional trauma, a lot of fear, and isolation, because we're way out in the middle of nowhere, not a lot of people around. So I grew up very much feeling like that was life, because I didn't have representation of how life was supposed to be.
Right.
My father was 61 years old when I was born.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so that's a whole different episode.
Right, sure.
And was, I don't hesitate to say he was a horrible human being. Just not a nice person in any way. And he started to sexually abuse me around the age of 6. That went on for a couple of years. He was 61, so he started to get a little too old, a little too sick. He had some serious health issues, and that stopped. But not long after that, an older neighborhood boy started to abuse me in his parents' basement. That all stopped when we left. So at the age of 12, I left that home. And I spent the next 35 years pretending none of it happened, running and just trying to forget it. And I did really well at that until the wheels came off. And then I sort of had to look at those things, and I had to do a bunch of work. And, I've been doing it now for about a dozen years, maybe a bit more than that. And, that's how I came to be here.
Okay. So when you're saying for that long period of time, you're pretending like none of that happened. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like? Are you just kind of going about your school day and then post-secondary, you go into the workforce after kind of thing? And what's your day-to-day like?
Sure. I was a pretty good, when you think about people who isolate, the idea is, the guy in the woods in the cabin who doesn't see anyone. That is certainly one way of isolating. I took a different path. I was in the middle of everything, mostly the bad decisions, right? If someone had a bad decision, I was like, oh yeah, let's do that, as a way of deflecting from the fact that I really wanted to be the guy in the hills. Right. But so I was in the middle of everything, but I was completely isolated because no one actually got in. No one knew what was going on. I couldn't tell anyone. I was terrified. And I just thought my world would end if people knew. Mm-hmm. People would look at me differently. They would judge. They would know. And this is the wrong way, but this is the message that was in the back of my head. People would know I had done something wrong. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's the message for a lot of survivors. They feel like they have done something wrong.
Right. And they're the guilty party.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what kept me quiet all those years. I felt like it was me. I was the problem. I was the thing to be ashamed of. So you're not going to share that. So you stuff that down and you go out in the world loud and exuberant and last guy up at the party, and like, let's go climb on the roof and do stupid things and all those things. And you can only keep that up for so long.
Right.
So yeah, I went to university primarily, if I'm being honest, and I hope no one from the provincial government is listening, primarily to get the OSAP loan.
Right.
And I dawdled around there for like a year and a half, and then left there and went out and had a whole bunch of fun. And then for me, work became an addiction, right? So I could bury myself in work. So I'd work 16 hours a day, get validation out of that, and stay busy enough that I didn't have to think about the things going on in my head.
Just anything else you could grab onto or attach yourself to. Then
you asked a little bit earlier about being busy. It's a distraction, right? Like it's a way to stay focused on anything but.
Right. So when you're 6 years old and these terrible things are happening, do you have anyone else around you at all? So you're living with your mother and your father. Do you have any other family or anyone who lives near you, or is there?
Yeah, so great question. I had an older brother who lived in the same house, but the thing to understand is that my father, because he was retired, because he was 61 when I was born, he was the primary person at home. So he's my source of safety. He's my source of food. He's my source of shelter. He's the source of everything. Because my mother was out busy trying to earn a living, trying to get an education, trying to probably avoid my father, do all these things. So he's the primary source of security. So when he takes me out in his car and he abuses me and he brings me home and says, "Don't tell anyone."
Right.
It truthfully wouldn't matter if there were 6 people outside of the car just waiting to hear what I had to say. It was never going to come out of my mouth, because that's my whole world.
Right.
And then so when that stopped, and then it began with the older neighborhood boy, there was never a "don't tell anybody," but I knew we didn't talk about this. So I'm pretty sure we don't talk about this.
Right. Okay.
Right.
It was just the natural way to go from there. Is that's the way you handled it.
This is how we survive. Right? Because at that point, that's what it is. It's survival. How do I get through this? How do I stay alive? How do I... so that's what it becomes.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Awful. So you said it was 35 years before you actually started to do, take steps in the right direction or do something productive with that, or kind of, not keep that inside anymore. So
yeah,
what changed? Like what happened there?
The primary thing that changed. So I dated this girl in high school when I was 16 years old. I dated this girl in high school. We were very much in love. And what I figured out was that she was a safe place for me. And at 16 years old, that scared the hell out of me. So I did the mature thing. I broke up with her and went on to date a bunch of people in her friend group. And I was, just run away from that because I couldn't fathom that and what that would mean. I happened to run into her when I was 35. In the Zellers in Georgetown, of all places. And she invited me to a party that she was having for some friends that I knew from high school. I went, and 6 months later we were engaged, and we got married 6 months after that. We've been together ever since. She's sitting right over there. Right. She provided me with a sense of safety, which was something that I'd never really had. Because growing up in that foundation of volatility and fear and all that stuff, even when I wasn't in that space, my amygdala and my brain was still like, oh, we have to be on high alert. So I lived in a space for all those years of just always on. like just always in a state of fight or flight. And it was only my lovely wife and her presence and everything she does for me that I was like, oh, there's a different thing. And what happened was soon after we got married, the wheels fell off. I couldn't keep it stuffed down anymore simply because I was in a safe place.
Right.
Right. It's like I'd been holding my breath.
Yeah.
For all these years, and then it's like, oh, you don't have to hold your breath anymore. Right. Yeah. And I literally, I was out for a run one day, and I just started sobbing.
Yeah.
And I came home, and came through the door, and I told her what had happened to me, and that there began the work, and saw doctors, saw therapists, saw counselors, and learned a great deal from them. But it was really, I had the opportunity to go to this place called the Gatehouse, which is down in Toronto. They do peer-to-peer support groups for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And that was really the place where it really began for me. This is like, oh, I can be honest here.
Right.
And people don't judge it. They don't make notes in a book and go, we're going to have to look back on that. They just sit around and go, yeah, me too. And particularly as a man, sitting in a room full of other men, it was like, oh my God. Because I'd lived my whole life thinking I'm a unicorn. Like this, I'm the only one who feels this way. I'm the only person this has ever happened to. And sort of being led into that community, it was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. And that was sort of how it all began for me.
Right. Okay. So going to that Toronto support group, that's kind of the first formal steps you took. But I mean, in order to break that open, I guess it was your wife here who just would, like, I guess knowing you had that support and able to do it, like you felt like you were doing the right thing by bearing it down until you realized there was someone.
I didn't realize there was an option.
Right. You didn't think there was any other way to go.
Nope.
Right.
Stuff it down. Right. Just, boys don't cry. Like all those things we hear.
Yeah.
Amplified over, because that's the thing. As a survivor and as a male survivor, you don't just think that every once in a while. That's a switch that's always on in my head. I'm always a survivor. I always bring that with me. It's not just when a news report comes on that I'm like, remember that and think about that. The filter of a survivor is what I see and hear everything through. So it's constant.
Right.
So it's just this message of don't talk, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk all the time. So to be able to lay that down for me required the safety and the unconditional love that my wife gives me.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad that happened for you too. And it's just, I have a hard time relating to it, but it's crazy to think that you had the feeling of guilt for something that you're clearly the victim of. That's something that had happened to you, and you bottled that up for 35 years, just thinking that was the right thing to do because for some reason in your mind you're the bad guy. That's
well, there's I was going to say very good, not very good. There are very understandable reasons why survivors feel that way. A lot of times the abuser says it to them. This is your fault.
Wow.
You caused this to happen. Boy's body reacts to touch. See, you like it. Well, if I liked it, then I must be culpable in some way. Right. So and at 6 years old, at 10 years old, we don't have the capacity to understand the nuance of that situation, to be able to rationalize. So we start at 6 or at 10 or whatever age with guilt. Guilt doesn't dissipate. It doesn't just wear off.
Right.
It becomes gangrenous, like it infects other systems. And until we find a place to be able to lay that guilt down, it's going to be attached to that thing. And it's 100% wrong, but it's understandable where it comes from.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. When you put it like that clears it up a bit there. And it's funny what you say about men being, we have to bottle these things up, and I think it's so awesome what you're doing that you're able to kind of open all this up. I come from a family of first responders, and for a very long time, there's always been, the talk around post-traumatic stress, and it was a very, so like, it's a different thing, but kind of along the same vein of, you don't talk, like, don't be a wussy. We don't talk about it. You just deal with it, whatever, this and that. And, for like, my grandfather was a cop, and from his area, he was very kind of, that's it. We don't talk about it. My father's a firefighter. It's kind of opened up a little bit. I've entered the fire service myself, and I'm glad to see we're seeing a lot more of that curtain being pulled up of, hey, like if you need to talk about something, we can. Like those conversations are happening a lot more. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. And so obviously kudos for what you're doing. I guess we can get into that. So you're trying to help others now today who may have similar experiences to you, and as well as their family members. So why don't you share a little bit about what you're doing now?
Sure. So when I started going to the Gatehouse, which I said is downtown Toronto, it's a hike to get down there, and it's traffic and so on and so forth. But we were in a situation where we could make that happen. They asked me to do some training, and I did, and they asked me to facilitate some groups, and I did, and I loved it, and it gave me a real sense of doing something good with something horrible that had happened to me, and I was good at it, I guess. I'm able to talk a lot. But I learned a lot, and I would drive home from down there, and I'd drive back into Georgetown, and I mean, I know the statistics, right? It's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men before the age of 18. I know that statistic. I know the population of Halton Hills, and there's nothing. There's no support. And I would talk to my wife on a fairly regular basis, like, could we do something? Could we? What would that look like? How would we? Like, how do you start something like that? And eventually, in late 2018, I think I have that right. In late 2018, we sat down in our kitchen table. We elected a board of directors. We signed a bunch of paperwork we probably didn't really understand. Yeah. Right, and we went to work, and we had no money, we had no funding, we had no real concept of what the program would look like. We just knew there was a need, and we were going to try. And so in February of 2019, we held our first session in a borrowed back space of an art studio, and 11 people walked through the door. Right. And we've been going ever since. We're about to hit our 7th year. We're fortunate enough that we're all privately funded. We don't take federal money or provincial money. It's all privately funded. We have some very generous people that we are eternally grateful to, and have put us in a position we were able to lease our own space, which was fantastic. You got to see the space today.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was a beautiful spot you got there.
Yeah. And sort of give us a home base, and that's allowed us to really expand our programming. So at the heart of what Ironwood does is we provide peer-to-peer support groups for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. All of our hosts are survivors. There are only survivors in the room. We're not clinicians. We're not psychotherapists. We don't think we have the answers. We build a room where you can bring things, questions, concerns, things you're struggling with, things you don't understand, and sort of crowdsource ideas. No one's ever going to tell you in Ironwood, well, you have to do this. We don't do that. I don't think I have the answers for you any more than I think you have the answers for me. But I can learn from your experience. Right. And I can take your experience and that person's experience and that person's experience, and I can put something together that works for me. And that's kind of the idea around Ironwood. So there's that portion of it. We've started a supporters program. So that's once a month. And that's for people with a survivor in their orbit. So, my wife attended a number of programs at the Gatehouse with me for partners, and there's not a lot of support for survivors. There's even less for their spouses, their parents, their siblings. There's nothing.
Right.
There's absolutely nothing.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a tough place to be, like,
Yeah.
because you don't. This is a tough subject. We don't like talking about this. So how are you going to bring that up at the dinner table or at a?
Right.
So we work with those folks to sort of understand, because there's some science, there's some neural network stuff that's just the basic science of it. And then there's, how to manage these things that come up and what to think about and how to interact as a couple or as a sibling or as a parent or whatever the relationship happens to be. And we found that program to be very helpful. We're very happy with that. My wife and I co-host that. So the idea being that, she's the expert of living with a survivor, because she's gotten to put up with me for all of these years.
Right.
But we thought it was important for them to have a survivor in the room, because it's much easier for someone to ask me a question than it might be to ask their partner or their child.
Right.
Because they can just ask me.
Right.
And then we can work through the details and they can take that out. Whereas broaching that subject with someone, you don't know how to do it. So I just give them a free rein. Like, this is Vegas.
Yeah.
Right? Ask me anything you want to.
Right.
And that's proven to be pretty helpful.
Right. Okay.
So we do that. We also do sort of one-off events. So we try and bring in experts or have different events go on where we can learn about different things. We had a EMDR session not long ago. Somatic yoga we've brought people to sort of try it out. We don't endorse those. We don't say, like, this is the fix. We just say, hey, here's a thing you might like to try.
Right.
Most recently, and this was a fantastic thing, was we had a person come in who primarily works with intimacy for sexual trauma survivors, which is a big topic for our folks. And we did a full day session. So the morning was for the partners. We had them separate. So she sat down and went through a whole 2-hour presentation with them. And then the afternoon was for our participants. And she spent 3 hours working with them. And it was it was a huge success. Started a lot of conversations, started a lot of things. So we're very excited about that. We're working on how to get her back in our space, because it was a big thing.
Right. Good. Yeah. So your wife had shared that statistic with me earlier today, and that kind of blew my mind. That 1 in 3, 1 in 6 under 18 is bananas to me. That's
Yep.
So yeah, kudos to you for obviously seeing the need for that resource there, seeing there's nothing in the area at all where anyone can go. And then obviously with the, the family members of the survivors and like that, there's going to be just naturally exponentially more of them. So I think that's fantastic what you're doing and the number of programs you're doing there. So I guess what would be, now, are you looking to expand, or is there any other programs you see on the horizon that you're looking to try to introduce? Like, where would more, I guess, funding go towards if you're looking to grow?
Sure. We're always looking to grow. So again, privately funded. So, we really need to look at how we are approaching fundraising for Ironwood. We've been very fortunate with some fantastic donors, but we want to stick around. We know the idea works. We know the program works. We want to stick around. So sort of building a bankroll and community presence for that is important. There's sort of no end to what we'd like to do. I would like to have a men's only group. And again, I mentioned this to you before. This may be a surprise. It's hard to get men to talk.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and it's been something we've worked at for a long time. We've had some men through the program, but very few. And I understand that. It makes sense to me. What it tells me is we have to build something different, or we have to approach those people differently, or we have to provide a different sense of, we have more work to do. But as far as future programming, yeah, I'd like to have a men's only program. We have the opportunity to have women's only programming. which begets a whole different conversation. And I think the same would be true of just men in the room. I've been in rooms like that at the Gatehouse.
Right.
And, we talk a bit about what a strong man is, like a durable, strong, like that whole concept. I have never in my life, and I've been a lot of places and met a lot of people, I've never in my life met men as strong as the men that I met at the Gatehouse. And these are men who would weep openly on the floor. And the strength to be able to do that, it's unbelievable.
Right.
So being able to provide the opportunity for, men in Halton region or wherever they come from, we don't ask for an address.
Right.
Like if you can get to our door,
Yeah.
we're happy to
You're
have you
welcome.
through the door. But building something like that would be fantastic. We're also working on prevention training.
Okay.
We would like to be out of business someday, but we can't just sit around and wait for that to happen.
Right.
So we're working on building prevention training. So we could go to schools, we could go to church organizations, we could go to parent groups and sort of present them with, how to do prevention in their own home and in their own organizations.
Right.
We're working on disclosure training. One thing we've learned from our participants is that a lot of their first disclosures were to their primary care provider, so their doctor, their GP, their family doctor, and most of those go really poorly. And what we've learned from talking to doctors is we don't know what to say. Right. We don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
So okay, well, there's a need, and we can bridge that gap. So we're building a disclosure training where we can go into doctors' offices and say, if you receive a disclosure, here's what you do, and here's what not to do.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, don't say, well, that was a long time ago. What do you want me to do about that? Don't say that.
Wrong thing. Right. Okay.
But a lot of them do.
Yeah.
Because they just don't know what to say for all their training. They've never been provided with that. And then we'd give them a certificate to put on the wall so that people sitting in the waiting room would go, okay, if I'm ready to talk, these people can receive it in a way that will be supportive.
Right.
To sort of build that sort of momentum there. Am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
Good coverage. Approval? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. We've worked hard to build a community presence. We asked our participants 2 years ago now, like, what should we be doing to get out into the community? And they all said the farmers market. And we were like, what? They're like, yeah, we want a booth at the farmers market. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So we did it. We were like, all right, if you guys want to do this, we'll make it happen. And we put up a booth at the farmers market, and we had people handing out information, and it was fantastic, and it helped to build a community presence, and it gave a lot of our participants an opportunity to be out in public, talking about some things, and it was really fantastic.
Right.
We also do training with Halton Regional Police Victim Services Unit.
Okay.
So their Victim Services Unit, they're the primary line of receiving incoming calls when people have endured violent crime. So we go every year or two and speak in front of their group and talk to about how to listen to a survivor, what to look for, and to understand what's actually going on. So building those community bridges has been very important to us.
Right.
So continuing to do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, was there a hand up over there?
What about, are we free to talk about that if it's on their website?
What's that?
Our space?
No.
Tell you later.
Yeah.
We can talk about that when the camera's off.
Yeah. No problem. So I just want to touch on the more on the prevention a little bit.
Sure.
So we had mentioned earlier when we were talking about the vast majority of times when this happens, it's someone close, it's a family member. It's so I'm glad we can have this conversation. Hopefully, get it out there so people at least can know that or be a little more aware. We hear all the time about stranger danger and things like that, but sometimes maybe you should be looking more inside for.
Yeah, there's that, there's that creepy guy by the park in the white van giving out free candy, that whole sort of concept. And I'm not saying don't be afraid of that guy, but that's a very small percentage. And I hope my wife is over there checking the numbers right now. But I believe that the current number in North America is over 90% of abusers are known to the family and to the victim of the crime.
90%.
90%.
Wow. Okay.
50% of the time, it's a close family member. And that number breaks down in far more upsetting ways. It's awful. And when I tell people that, when people, whether I'm working for Ironwood or just in conversation, I get this blank stare of like, I don't want to hear this, which is why we don't hear this, right? It's an awful thing to consider.
Right. Yeah.
So why would you want to talk about that?
Right.
And then there's all this thing, these myths of, well, it's this stranger danger and we don't let our kids around strangers. Well, that's not true. Like that's just simply not true, and we have to talk about that. We have to talk. We have to get over, as adults, as caretakers of children, we have to get over that awkward feeling of broaching that subject.
Right.
So let's take an example. Let's say you're a hockey coach.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And I have kids, and it's a high level hockey. I don't know what the hockey stuff is, but whatever. Rep hockey team.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're having an open day for signups for your team, and you've got your whole coaching squad there. And I have a kid who wants to play on your team. I need to be able to come up to you and say, what's the schedule like? How many times a week are we going to be on the ice? How much is this going to cost me? How many tournaments a year? What's your plan to prevent sexual abuse? What's your concussion protocol?
Right.
I need to be able to say those things to you, and you need to be able to receive those things, not in me accusing you of anything,
Right.
but as the two of us accepting that it exists in the world,
Right.
and as caretakers of children, what are we going to do about it?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You can't just keep avoiding the conversation because it's not a nice thing to talk about when it's again happening the way it is.
And I, as a parent, have to be empowered to, I guess the short way to say it is not care what you think.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, right.
I don't care if you think I'm rude for asking that. I'm going to ask it because I know the statistics. And what we need to do in that disclosure training is we need to be going to coaching groups. We need to be going to sporting associations and saying, when people ask that question, here's what you need to be able to provide. And it's not about me saying you're a bad guy. It's about both of us accepting there are bad people in the world.
Right.
And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Which I think is indisputable at this point, right? That's, yeah.
Yeah. And I get the idea that, well, it doesn't happen in our town and all those things. If you have the stomach for it, it's a tough listen, but a good listen. There's a fantastic podcast out called Hunting Warhead.
Okay.
And it really details a lot of information. As I said, it's a hard listen, but it can be very important. And the person, Warhead, is an individual, and they're the person who at one point had the biggest child abuse website on the planet. And how they found him, how they tracked him down, how they arrested him, how they incarcerated him. They arrested him in Virginia in 2016. He's still in prison in the States, will be there for the rest of his life. But it's the whole story and all the background and all those things. It's a very, don't listen to it at night just before bed. Like, right. It's tough, but it can be very important. And when, excuse me, in 2013, there was a task force that took down what was at the time the biggest child abuse website on the internet. And when they took it down, it had 45,000 registered users.
Holy smokes, okay.
A requirement of which was to upload images and video to maintain their membership.
You had to participate in, okay.
You got to commit the crime to stay on our roll.
Wow.
45,000 registered users. That's upsetting.
Yes.
2013. This guy Warhead started his website in February of 2016. He was arrested in October of 2016. When he was arrested, this task force got control of his website and they started to do their work. When they took it over, it had over 1 million.
Yeah. So
Over 1 million registered users in 8 months.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, the requirement is you have to upload images and video.
Right.
All of that is wildly upsetting, but wildly important to know. The most upsetting part for us as individuals, as parents, as people who care about our community, sitting here in Georgetown and having this conversation, is at the time of his arrest, he lived in Guelph.
All right.
So the idea that this isn't in our backyard,
Yeah.
it's not true. We're telling ourselves that so we don't have to be scared.
Right. It's easier for us to sleep at night just to,
And I don't
say that, and we don't see it, and we don't talk about it,
And I don't want people to be scared, but I do need them to be informed.
right.
And those are the facts. You can go and look them up. You
Yeah.
can, it's easy to research, but saying, well, I've never heard of it, so it doesn't exist,
Right.
it just doesn't cut it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot you've thrown at me today. I'm definitely guilty of having my head in the sand a little bit. That's, again, kudos to you. I think it's incredible what you're doing. First of all, having the courage to share your story, and then also being able to present this information, because again, it's so much easier just to ignore, not think, not talk about it. It's not a nice subject. It's, but yeah. So again, thanks for what you're doing. Obviously, thanks for helping. You seem to be helping other people have the courage to be able to share their story. And it seems like you're building like a nice little team under you that's kind of, helping out at the farmer's market and things like that. And they seem to be sharing their story with other people, which is, I think, incredible.
Yeah.
I guess last thing I would just ask you, do you have any final thoughts, whether related or not, just anything you would, if you had 30 seconds to a minute to just share or tell anybody anything, what would that be?
Yeah, look, if you need more information, if you're watching, if you're listening, I don't know how people sort of ingest this episode, but if you need more information, contact us. We're happy to share whatever you're looking for. You want to know about the program, if you have someone in your orbit who could use the program, if you want to know about the supporters program, if you want to know about statistics, come and check our website. We've got lots of stuff there. By the way, so if you'd like to make a donation, one of the reasons we don't operate with any sort of government subsidy is we don't want the oversight that comes with it.
Right.
We want to be able to make our program by survivors for survivors, and we lose some of that when we take federal money or provincial money. So by all means, if you'd like to make a donation, we're happy to receive that. There's a section on the site where you can do that. But keep asking questions. Right? Go out and listen to that podcast. It's a tough one, but it's worth listening to. Ask questions. Don't assume anything. Right. There's some folks at Canadian Centre for Child Protection. If you have kids and you want some more resources. They have a fantastic set of resources, a lot of information. Online predation is a big thing now. Everybody's got a digital device, and it's a huge problem. Yeah. So figuring out how to manage that, how to support your kids, all those kind of things. There's work to be done. Prevention is possible. You just got to get out there and do it. Right.
Great. And then, so website is the best way to kind of get all that information and donate?
Yes, the ironwoodproject.ca.
Okay.
If you're looking for general info, it's info@theironwoodproject.ca, or if you want to email me directly, Chris@theironwoodproject.ca.
Beautiful. And the name of that podcast, one more time, was?
Hunting Warhead. I forget where I picked it up, but I believe it's a CBC podcast.
Okay.
Very well done.
Yeah.
But again, tough listen.
Right. All right. Beautiful. Well, thanks again for sharing your story with me and whoever might be listening today. I really appreciate it. Again, thanks for having the courage for doing what you're doing. I think that's amazing, Chris.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this. I really appreciate the idea behind it, and good luck with everything going forward. Thanks for the time.
Great. Thank you very much.